With less than 48 hours from the Seahawks' first preseason game of the 2022 season in Pittsburgh, we're going to dive into the trenches to assess the situations on both offensive and defensive lines ahead of that game. Don't miss it here on Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12s. This is Nick Lee, your host for the next couple of episodes of Locked On Seahawks. Thank you so much for joining us. Corbin is away, preparing to get married this weekend. Congrats to him and his lovely bride, Natalia. So we're going to hold down the fort. The substitute teacher is in, so to speak, here. And, of course, joining me along this ride is the distinguished Rob Rang. Thank you, and thank you always to our listeners for tuning in. However you may be listening or wherever you may be, your first listen 5 days a week here on Locked On Seahawks. Be it Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, however you get your podcasts. Thanks once again for tuning in. Later in the show, we're going to assess the situations down in the trenches, the big boys, the big uglies, however you say it. This is where football games are often won or lost. And what does the situation and the rotations perhaps look like ahead of the first preseason game in Pittsburgh this Saturday on both sides of the trenches? We'll discuss that a bit later in the podcast. Now for your lead story here on Locked On Seahawks. There was a bit of news that came out down earlier this week in Seahawks land. There was a signing of journeyman cornerback Jamison Houston. He went undrafted out of Baylor in the April 2020 draft and has bounced around to the teams of the Browns, the Panthers, the Eagles, and Jaguars before landing here in Seattle this week. And we're going to discuss kind of what that means for the Seahawks room. But it sounds like with the injuries to the to the cornerback group here in Seattle, that the Seahawks felt that this move was necessary, Rob.
Yeah, I think that it makes an awful lot of sense. As you just said, Nick, the Seattle has struggled a little bit with durability at that cornerback spot. We know that Sidney Jones has been dealing with concussion injury. Artie Burns, pulled his groin. Pete Carroll made it sound like it wasn't that serious, but that Artie Burns was not likely to be available for this particular game against Pittsburgh Steelers. John Reed has been out as well. The rookie cornerbacks have been spectacular. Kobe Bryant has been very, very consistent. Tariq Woolen certainly has flashed and also been very, very consistent in terms of coverage. But at the same time, once you're actually playing in a real game, especially against a team that you know is going to run the football as much as the Pittsburgh Steelers, they're going to spread the ball out as much as they are, then you just have to have bodies. And you use that term, Nick, journeyman. And certainly Jamison Houston has proven to be that, 4 or 5 different NFL clubs since coming into the league as an undrafted free agent. But I can tell you this, he was a 3-star recruit. He went through 3 different head coaches at Baylor. Art Briles, who is distinguished head coach, has issues off the field, but certainly is a good coach. Jim Grobe, former All-ACC head coach at Wake Forest. And then, of course, Matt Rule, who now is the head coach in the Carolina Panthers. And when you're a player that has to go through all of that transition, Nick, as you probably well realize, and maybe some of our fans listening will recognize this as well. But again, I think that a lot of times when people look at it like this is a guy who got signed in the eve of the first preseason game, basically, he has no shot at making the NFL roster, right? And I would argue against that. As I've just mentioned, I mean, this is a decorated athlete. He is well-versed in different NFL schemes, and the Seahawks need bodies. He is going to be on the field, if not against Pittsburgh, then likely next week's against Chicago. And that is going to get an awful lot of eyes on Jamison Houston at a position where Seattle needs help. Most of the NFL teams need help in the secondary, given the offenses in today's game. So I'm excited for Jamison Houston's opportunity. I'm also obviously excited about the opportunities for Seattle's younger corners. But at the same time, I think this is a pretty big signing for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which, again, is just the opportunity Jamison Houston now has in front of him.
And Houston most recently played for the Michigan Panthers of the USFL. And again, like you mentioned, this is definitely to address the thin herd right now at cornerback with the rookies. And of course, I'm really excited about this cornerback position. And last week in a show, I mentioned that if I had to pick one position group that I was forced to watch and battle for playing time and forced to watch as far as how the depth chart shakes out throughout training camp, it's the cornerback room. I think this is a fascinating position group. Unfortunately, with the injuries, it's got a little less of an edge to it now. And with Trey Brown, still seems like he's a bit of a long shot to really play significant snaps in the preseason. It's going to take a while for him to ramp up. And those dang groin injuries, man, with Artie Burns and John Reed, those can take a while to heal, just so that soft tissue stuff. And obviously the positive here is Jameson Houston just kind of rolls off the tongue there. We'll definitely get another shot. And he's got some game experience. I think he played 3 games for the Eagles as a rookie. And of course, this will be a bit of a more opportunity for the rookie cornerbacks to get exposed a bit more in some of the preseason action in at camp. And you had to get some experience in there. You had to bring in a guy that has done it in the NFL a little bit. Obviously not, a Pro Bowler or anything like that. Not a huge, expensive signing, but definitely you want an injection of experience and a variety of experiences, like you mentioned, in that room, because otherwise, you're going to be out there with your 2 rookie cornerbacks. And while that is fun to think about, especially in a year where it's a bit of a transition, you like to have some of your guys maybe a bit of a baptism by fire, learning on the fly. There's a bit of a trepidation with that, especially in the cornerback position, where a few things go wrong, as we saw last year. The other team can put up points in a hurry. So you definitely want some experience in that room.
You absolutely do. I mean, that's been one of the biggest concerns I have about the offensive tackle position, where, of course, Seattle doesn't have anybody with any kind of real starting experience. Of course, Jake Curhan being the elder statesman of the bunch with his 4 or 5 NFL career starts to this point, as a second-year NFL player. And so, again, I think that the addition of Jameson Houston and the fact that he is, a veteran who has had his stops in several different NFL teams, it would be the most natural thing in the world, Nick, for Kobe Bryant, for Tariq Woolen to have a little bit of stars in their eyes. There could be a 3-River Stadium going against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, talk about, NFL, greats, and just, one of those places that just screams the NFL, the league. And so there's going to be some welcome to the NFL kind of moments. And I think to have I don't know if I would call him a grizzled veteran, but a veteran of these types of experiences like Jameson Houston, as well as obviously all of the different veterans that Seattle already has on their roster. I just think it's a really good perspective for those young players to be able to bounce some ideas off of, because if they do have those stars in their eyes, and I don't want to suggest that Tariq Woolen and Kobe Bryant are not ready for the moment, everything that they have shown with the Butkus Award, the Thorpe Award winner, and the Tariq Woolen with the combine performance and Senior Bowl performances that both of these players had, they've shown their ability to rise to the occasion. But still, if they do walk in there with a little bit of stars in their eyes, so to speak, to have a player who is on the edge of the roster like Houston, who is going to just come in hungry and ready to do everything he possibly can, I just think it's going to be a huge advantage for the Seahawks to have that kind of perspective. It's similar to what maybe Rashad Penny saw when Adrian Peterson was brought into the fold a year ago.
Yeah, you bring up a good point with Adrian Peterson. Yeah, and obviously, Jameson Houston isn't exactly Richard Sherman or Jalen Ramsey,
Sure.
and we're not going to try to blow smoke saying that this guy is going to be this guy's a sleeping Pro Bowler kind of thing. Bottom line is you want some competition, and you want these rookies to be a bit shielded a little bit. And Tariq Woolen, the best competition he played in college, at least last season, was against Illinois. I mean, that's a big jump. And Kobe Bryant, even though he played for Cincinnati, certainly Cincinnati played some big teams, and granted they've looked good in camp against other NFL guys, like Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. They've held their own. But point is, you bring in some experience. Is Houston better than Woolen or Bryant in the long run? Probably not. But you bring in a guy who's going to work hard and push those rookies, and that's a win. Get some snaps in the preseason, see what you got there. And plus you need some insurance. If, heaven forbid, one of those guys goes down, you want to be prepared. And I know Mike Jackson also is waiting in the wings as well. But we have lots of time to dive into that, especially after we have a bit of film to digest after that first game. Coming up next, we dive deep into the trenches. What's going on along the offensive and defensive lines for Seattle ahead of the first preseason game, some things out to watch out for during that game. Don't miss it ahead here on Locked On Seahawks. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. Ready? Delicious, indulgent chocolate cookie dough. Covered in chocolate. That's right. Built Bar has done it again. Let me introduce you to your new favorite. Cookie dough chunk puffs have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course they are covered in real 100% chocolate. All of the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. Plus, it's healthy for you. Cookie dough chunk puffs are only 160 calories, and they have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. Run to Built.com to snag a box for you and the family. And it would be the perfect treat, or you can find a really good hiding place for it and just hoard them for yourself. Like all Built bars, the new cookie dough chunk puff is 100% covered in 100% real chocolate. That means they're healthy and tasty. Chocolate-covered cookie dough with a light, fluffy texture that's so good. What's great about Built is that all of their bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. You are going to love the new cookie dough chunk puff. Whether you need a snack for your workout, a late night treat, or just need to grab a quick bite, Built is the perfect protein bar, and they taste better than a candy bar. Ditch the chocolate, or ditch the calories, the fat, and the sugar. Grab yourself a Built bar offer. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKEDON15, and get 15% off your order. Use promo LOCKEDON15. Welcome back to Locked On Seahawks here on this Thursday. I'm Nick Lee, along with Rob Rang. I'm kind of playing substitute teacher here as Corbin is away, preparing for a big moment in his life. So once again, congrats to him. And, of course, Rob, thank you once again for joining us as one of the common hosts here on Locked On Seahawks. And in case you guys didn't know, I will be taking on a bit of a bigger role as well as the season progresses. And you're going to see my ugly mug a bit more than once a week, I think. And I hear my somewhat annoying voice perhaps more than once a week. So if you don't like that, sorry. I hope you enjoyed either way. But let's dive into the offensive line here, Rob. And the ESPN came out with a ranking of the offensive lines. And I know we all know these lists are kind of arbitrary to start the year. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot, and these are just guesswork, much like, the preseason polls in college football, which everyone loves to get mad about for no reason. So that ESPN actually ranked the Seahawks 30th out of 32nd along the offensive line, stating that although they invested, a lot of the draft capital in Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas in first and third round picks, they'll pay, to quote them directly, it says they'll pay dividends down the road, but odds are that it will make it a rough 2022. Offensive linemen, even early draft picks, are usually below average in their rookie seasons. So sounds like, they're not a big believer in at least the initial start of the season for the Seahawks along the offensive line. Let's talk about this from a standpoint of going into the first preseason game and what to look for. Now, of course, you have your starting left tackle at Charles Cross. I think we can all agree that there isn't much to be, competition. There isn't really much to discuss as far as the position battle at left tackle. It sounds like the Seahawks are pretty sold at using their number 9 overall pick week 1 at left tackle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in Charles Cross, that's why I think we have to start the conversation. Obviously the earliest the Seattle has used a selection on any offensive lineman since Russell Okung, number 6 overall, and John Schneider and Pete Carroll's very first year together. He is the easy answer at the left tackle position. He makes this roster. It's going to be interesting to see what happens behind him if Stone Forsythe does take over at that spot. I think that for the most part, the offensive line, at least the starters, look pretty solid, much to the chagrin of those ESPN rankers out there. As you mentioned, I just look at it like, Abraham Lucas and Jay Curran, that's going to be the conversation at that right tackle position. But basically everything else is pretty much solidified. And I think what's interesting is that you look at, speaking of Jay Curhan, you just look at what a kind of anomaly he was a year ago, Nick. I mean, in the 8 years that the Seahawks have, been working together, John Schneider and Pete Carroll been working together since Seattle's Super Bowl run in 2013. They have kept 9 offensive linemen the majority of the time. There's only been twice that they kept as many as 10 offensive linemen. And last year, they kept 11. And normally those 10 would be exactly what you'd expect, the starting 5 and then a primary backup behind each of those positions. And sometimes you would drop down to 9 if you had a really versatile player, might be able to play that swing role. In the years past, it's been guys like Jamarco Jones, for example. But last year, again, having 11, that's the most that the Seahawks have ever kept in the offensive line, at least during the Pete Carroll, John Schneider era. Again, it was just kind of unusual for Seattle to have that many offensive linemen. Normally they have the 5 tackles, the 5 interior linemen. They had the 6 tackles last year. So I think when you look at it this year, it's going to be interesting to see. They only have 13 offensive linemen on the roster right now. So we're talking about only a couple of guys who are likely to be cut, and they might wind up being practice squad members. Seattle had 2 practice squad members along the offensive line a year ago. So again, I think that it's going to be interesting to see how the actual numbers play out, and if Seattle's 2 young rookies are really ready to hit the ground running as well as Seattle thinks that they are. Pete Carroll's been kind of talking about, and there's these very, very high expectations. But again, for the same reason why I think that Tariq Woolen and Kobe Bryant might have stars in their eyes when they go to Three River Stadium and when they get those terrible towels rolling and that pass rush is coming in. I know it's a preseason game, but Charles Cross, Abraham Lucas especially, and the rest of Seattle's tackles too, Stone Forsythe, Jake Curran also. And then the interior of the offensive line, I think, is a relatively strength, at least at the guard spots. But I'm really curious to see what's going to happen at center. I mean, obviously, you have Austin Blythe, and he's going to be his very first game. But then what happens after that? Is it going to be Kyle Fuller? Is it going to be Dakota Shepley? To me, that while everybody's going to be focusing on the right tackle, I'm going to be focusing on the inside center and really seeing how well Austin Blythe is snapping the ball to Geno Smith and Drew Lock. And then who is the number 2 center? And does he do a good job against a formidable Pittsburgh front?
Yeah, if you've been following me along, the offseason, I've been pounding the table that the center position is one of the bigger question marks on this whole team, and it has been for multiple seasons now. And now you're at a point where you're probably getting ready to draft a rookie quarterback this next spring. I really, really hope that the Seahawks really solidify the center position. I am not sure. I'm not sold on Austin Blythe. I know he started every game for the Rams in 2020. All they did is replace him and win the Super Bowl. And then when he went to KC, he got beat out by Creed Humphrey, who the Seahawks passed on in the draft. And to bring that up again. So he didn't play much, and he was a healthy scratch quite often for KC. So I'm really not sold on him at center. I understand the familiarity with Shane Waldron's offense, and I am, I'm of course rooting for him because I want the Seahawks to do well, and I understand so there's some things to work with with his familiarity with the system. So I'm going to be watching the center position pretty closely on Saturday to see how well I know again. The Steelers do have a decent defensive line. There's a guy named TJ Watt. I don't think he plays much. But there's no Aaron Donald in the middle that they're going to have to go on. But, eventually Austin Blythe will have to match up with Aaron Donald twice. So it's going to be an interesting situation there. I argue that this is still one of the bigger question marks on the entire team is at center. Both guard spots, Damian Lewis, this is year 2 on the left side. There was a dip in the Pro Football Focus numbers from his rookie year to his first year, or rookie year at the right side to his first year on the left side last season. His grade went from a 70.2 to a 57.1 on Pro Football Focus. So there's, I think, he wasn't quite healthy. He was kind of learning a new side. Everything had to be flipped in his mind a little bit. So I understand some struggles there. And I think I'm hoping a healthy Damian Lewis in year 2 on the left side, it's a bit stronger. And Gabe Jackson on the left side, or on the right side, I think this is an interesting situation because Pete Carroll has been extremely complimentary of the guy breathing down his neck and Phil Haynes. And I know Corbin's been a big Phil Haynes fan all camp, and he's been impressive. And so if you're looking for, you're deep in the woods of the offensive line kind of rotation for this preseason game, I really want to see Phil Haynes out there. And, I don't think that there's a direct, mano-a-mano competition between him and Gabe Jackson at the moment for that right spot. I think Gabe Jackson is the leader in the clubhouse for the job. But Phil Haynes is someone to watch for perhaps as a guy to challenge the incumbent starter because he's had a pretty good camp.
He's had terrific camp, Nick, and Phil Haynes is a player that, I'm really excited about as well. As you said, Pete Carroll has been kind of extolling his virtues. Called him a third starter, so he felt really good about the guard spot. And as we talked about, center is a position of concern. Tackles are so young, and you obviously don't know exactly what the plan is just yet at the quarterback position. So there's a line of thinking that, what is the reason to have a Pro Bowl guard that is getting paid the way that Gabe Jackson Jackson is. If, say, a Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who just had some injuries, unfortunately, to the interior of their offensive line, if they or another team that is perceived as a Super Bowl favorite were to have some type of issues around the interior of their offensive line, they were to dangle a mid or late round draft pick Seattle's way for a veteran like Gabe Jackson. I think that's something that John Schneider has to think about at least. So again, if you are watching in the second half and you want to see interior offensive linemen that might, based on their play, might actually have be a huge domino that could drop kind of a thing, then yeah, I think the Phil Haynes and the rest of Seattle's interior offensive linemen, how they play could absolutely play a role in what Seattle decides to do with Gabe Jackson. I think that they feel very confident that he is the guy at right guard, obviously moving Damian Lewis over the left side, as you mentioned. But at the same time, it is a luxury for this club and one that I think that the team could opt to do something or just stand pat and just wait for the rigors, because as you mentioned very correctly, sir, Aaron Donald is still in LA. He's still a monster. And we'd like to have some big guys like Seattle's guards to be able to kind of combat that, especially given the concerns you have at tackle and center.
And I think the other one is to watch for as well. Most people, when Abe Lucas was taken third round as a right tackle, most assumed that he would also kind of be a plug and play guy at right tackle. But I feel like Jake Curran was kind of that Usher meme going around, like, watch this, this. Yeah. Well, watch how I think about that. And Jake Curran's really come along strong. He had some iffy numbers, as far as the analytics last year, but it seems like he's really built on that this offseason and this camp, and has really taken a hold of that starting spot at right tackle. So I'm really interested to see that the rotation at right tackle this game, and how obviously I think they're both going to play, and how they do against the speedy edge guys that the Steelers have to offer. Maybe not TJ Watt prime time, it's a preseason game, but still some talent along that defensive line. And speaking of which, we're going to go now to the defensive line, Rob, and talk about the similar situation along the defensive line. There's plenty of players who are new to the system, or everyone's kind of learning a new system. But you got newcomers like Uchenna Nwosu, Shelby Harris, and of course Quentin Jefferson coming back for a second stint, and Boye Mafe, the rookie, Al Woods, of course the steady veteran, Poona Ford in there as well. And I'm really excited about perhaps what Darrell Taylor can do. So you got your assumed starting spots. You got Uchenna Nwosu, Shelby Harris, Al Woods, Poona Ford, and Darrell Taylor, the assumed starters along the defensive line and the edge there. I'm really interested to see Boye Mafe. I feel like he's had kind of a quiet camp. Like, he hasn't been terrible, but he hasn't really had some of those standout moments that some of the other players and some of the rookies from this class have had along camp. And I know it's really tough for the pass rushing to really shine and get a good gauge for that in camp, just because you can't lay out your quarterback on training camp, and the pads aren't as popping as you see on Saturday. So I'm really interested, Rob, to get your take on where you see Boye Mafe fitting in this, and also maybe what to watch for along the defensive line come Saturday.
Yeah, I think first off with Mafe, just the sheer athletic ability is pretty obvious when you get an opportunity to kind of see him up close and personal. I think that you're going to see that, kind of come through against the Pittsburgh Steelers. They are kind of known for getting the ball out of their hands, the quarterback, a little bit faster, at least during this training camp, than what Big Ben Roethlisberger, of course, did for throughout his, soon to be Hall of Fame career. And so I don't know that you're going to have quite as many opportunities to really pin your ears back and rush the quarterback the way that Boye Mafe and the rest of Seattle's edge rushers would like. I hope that's the case from Seattle's perspective. I think it would have been a lot of fun to have seen Seattle's pass rushers be able to go after an aging Ben Roethlisberger. But now you got Mitch Trubisky, who is a pretty athletic quarterback. People don't give him a lot of credit for how quick he is to escape the pocket. And he usually gets the ball out of his hands pretty quickly. Mason Rudolph, of course, has a great deal of experience in their offense. And then you've got the rookie in Kenny Pickett. And, there was so much was made about Kenny Pickett's small hands in the pre-draft process. So you asked where I think the Boye Mafe can make a big play. He can do exactly what he did in the Senior Bowl game. He can absolutely take over with his speed and power. I think that I would not be surprised at all if he winds up getting a sack, maybe a forced fumble in this kind of a game, just because he is going to be going up against tackles who are not as familiar with him as Abe Lucas, who went up against him in the Senior Bowl of course, and then a little bit more of a crafty veteran kind of guy in Jake Curran, who's been able to go against him. I think you'll see Boye Mafe for the most part be going off of that right tackle side, and I think that's going to help him a little bit. I think Mafe is going to be productive and show some flashes. I just think you have to move him straight upfield, not ask him to drop back, and that's part of the conversation right there. It's just how many bodies, because Seattle is making that adjustment along their defense. In the past, they have gone traditionally with 9 defensive linemen, and as I mentioned before, often 9 offensive linemen, 9 defensive linemen. It's been interesting how often Seattle has basically just matched the same number of offensive and defensive linemen, at least on their initial 53-man roster. Last year, if you were to count Darrell Taylor as a defensive lineman, they had 10 guys on the offensive line, as I mentioned before, on the defensive line, excuse me. To me, that's going to be interesting to see this year what they're going to be doing there, because right now they have 13, I believe, defensive linemen, again, including guys like Darrell Taylor and Boye Mafe. So I'm fascinated to kind of see the guys who I think are on the bubble are going to be guys like LJ Collier, who is a better football player, I think, than it's perceived by a lot of people in Seattle, because they, using a first-round pick, I think the Seahawks fans wanted him to be a 10-sack kind of a guy, and he's just not that kind of a guy. But he is strong at the point of attack. He's kind of the opposite of a Darrell Taylor, Boye Mafe kind of a guy. But can you go with a guy like him and then cut a player like Alton Robinson? And so I just think that you're going to basically be running out of jobs. So I kind of have a list here of 6 guys, and I wonder if maybe you're talking about 3 of these 6 at most making this roster. And here are the 6 right I think are on the edge. And that being, again, LJ Collier, Alton Robinson, Miles Adams, Tyreek Smith, Matt Gottell, Jared Hewitt. There's another player, Antonio Valentine. I mean, you're talking about 6-7 players with only 2 or 3 spots at most available to them. So, yeah, talk about fighting and scratching and clawing for jobs. I think that's what's going to make this defensive line group something to watch in the Pittsburgh Steelers game, and, again, on the rest of the Seattle's training camp, because this is going to be a fight, scratch, and claw kind of a battle.
Yeah, you bring up a great point with some of the competition there. And LJ Collier probably, I imagine, won't play. He's pretty banged up right now, and I think that's going to unfortunately be a knock against him in this case. Miles Adams is a charging challenger to that spot. Alton Robinson, I think, same thing, with just being on the bubble for sure, and some guys that are hungry behind him. Miles Adams, I think, is another one, a sneaky one to watch for, perhaps, later on in the game, because he came on and had some opportunities last season. And I think he endeared himself to the coaching staff, and now with Collier not being available, and we say all the time, the best ability is availability. And right now, LJ Collier has not been. Unfortunately, some of that's not his fault. It's sheer bad, dumb luck. But that's just kind of the nature of the game. So hopefully he can get it back in there and really start to fight for his spot. Because if Miles Adams comes in there and shines on Saturday, LJ Collier, of course, I'm assuming will not play. I could be wrong. I could be missing a report there. But if Miles Adams shines and LJ Collier's on the sidelines and civilian clothes, that won't spell great for him, and it's unfortunately the kind of the nature of the beast in the business. I'm excited. I know that that we're talking about preseason, so we won't see the assumed starters a ton. Uchenna Nwosu, I think, is one of the more sneaky good signings the Seahawks have made, coming off a career year, 5 sacks, 30 pressures, all career highs, still only 25 years old. I really think that this could be a sneaky good signing to pair him with Darrell Taylor. I think could turn into a pretty phenomenal combo off the edges. I know we probably won't get a ton of snaps with those two together in the preseason games moving forward, just because those are the 2 assumed starters off the edges. But I think that there'll be some more exciting ones. So, yeah, Rob, you bring up some great points about the competition behind the guys. And Brian Monet is another one. I don't think his job's like in jeopardy, but a guy that certainly has been a stalwart on this team and a rising star, perhaps. So, yeah, the defensive line as a whole, I think, is a bit more solidified than the offensive line. There's been an injection of talent. And Darrell Taylor, I think, is a walking double-digit sack man. If he can just get his opportunities and get in the right scheme and stay healthy, I think Darrell Taylor has an enormous opportunity to notch double-digit sacks. And it's going to be fun to watch in the trenches. I know that the preseason game, there's a bit of a feeling out process, but Rob and I tomorrow on Friday's show, we'll break down kind of what to watch for a bit more in depth of the 2 sides between the Seahawks and the Steelers ahead of the game at 4 p.m. on Saturday Pacific time. Thank you for listening. You can follow me at NickLee51. Sorry for all the baseball tweets. Sorry, not sorry, really. But as the season goes on, of course, football will be king. And you can also follow Rob Rang at Rob Rang on Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us. And see you next time on Friday's show for a preseason preview here on Locked On Seahawks.